like we talk about like all the drills that you do, but like when you go into a fight and you start discussing the preparation, it's different. So how do you take that piece and implement it into training all the time? That's why a lot of the drills changed.
Right, and that's what it took us 40 years to figure out. Like, we were figuring this out through the 80s when people were trying to stab us on the street and stuff, and people were getting jumped going to school. And but there's a few components that are different. So remember, we were young, so this is how all fighting was for us. There's always going to be a weapon, and there's always going to be a lot of people attacking. Yeah, it's always been like that. Like when you fought empty hand with someone, that was like friendly shit in the backyard. You know what I mean? Like, we loved it. Don't get me wrong. We loved sparring. We liked going at it, but it was not the same as that other stuff. You know, like sparring was like frolicky stuff. You know what I mean? Like, you know, oh, that was a good shot, and you shook hands and all that. But I knew guys that, you know, we would go do sparring sessions, and then we would go home. They would get jumped and get fucked up. Or guys who do competitions, and then they go to the bus stop with their first place trophy, and then they get robbed by a bunch of dudes, no knife, just a bunch of guys robbing them, and they got sticks on their back, and like bahi sticks, not even like rattan sticks, you know, because rattan sticks are not weapons, right? They're like the action flex of the sword world, you know what I mean? But I remember, like, that always had to change, but that's how it started. That's how it always started. And my dad did a couple of more things like that. We heard a couple of things after that. I mean, we've seen him do some shit, and that's how it influenced. You know, because we were coming off of like basic drills and some triangle footwork, you know. But that, I mean, it's good. But the stuff that we were seeing in the 80s, that was not preparing you for the fights. That was not 100% not preparing you. Like, we had to modify.
Especially if things were getting, like you were saying, if things were getting bad, or you knew something was going to, the probability of something happening was high, then the training would change up. Or, you know, my father would say, he'd see us training, and, you know, as he started getting more experience, he'd say things like, you're moving, that's too much, you're moving too much. It's like, well, this is what they show us. Like, that's too much, what you're doing is too.
Yeah, because eventually we met other FMA guys, and we would do their drills because it was fun.
Yeah.
You know, you feel like drills. You do feel like you're doing something. Then we'd come home, and me and my brother would be doing the drill, or you're watching a video of some dude doing something, and my dad would look at us and say, "Look, man, in real life, there's not enough time. You don't have a lot of opportunity. You're not going to hit somebody that many times. He's not going to stand there." So he was constantly doing that, and then we started to say our own things, and he was right.
I remember sometimes he'd see us sparring, hitting for the head, and he'd say, "Don't, you're going to kill somebody."
Right.
Like, don't go for the head. You're gonna kill somebody. You're gonna kill somebody.
Right. For the first, you know, I started at 5. For the first 5 to 10 years, he never trained us to hit people in the head. It was always, hit the hands and the knees. Because he knew there was a high possibility that if we hit somebody head, we would have killed them. You gotta remember, by the time it was 15, 14, 19, we had been doing FMA for 10 years already.
We started carrying heavier weapons.
We were toting blades and pipes. Yeah, and we seen some shit. And we would always think the guys were fighting are not good because they're street guys. Later we found out they were the hardest guys to fight. Like, we would spar like other FMA guys, and then we would spar street guys. Those were the hardest guys. They were the hardest fights, you know, because they were fighters. They had the intent. You know, like, if you train with a guy who was a martial art guy and not a combatant, you know, they're frolicky, trying to do their little hand game and stuff. That street guy, he would try to get you. Luckily, he would also get tired fast. So that was cool. A lot of, you know, eventually we did a lot of sparring because it was not as stressful as fighting on the street. Like, you didn't have to, there was no pressure, you know, like there was no real stress. You know, because in sparring, you could spar for 3 hours straight with a bunch of dudes.
Yeah, and you're all friends.
And you're all friends. Even if it's personal, like guys would come and do challenge matches. Even then, like, you wouldn't really, they would get hurt, but nobody would call the cops. Sometimes they would try and sue you and stuff. On the street, when you're fighting for real, like, you're fighting for your life, it's the next 10 seconds that count. That's it. You're just fighting in a life and death thing. You're fighting for the next 10 seconds, and you're hoping in the next 10 seconds your life doesn't change from the way it was before that fight started. That's all. You try to fight for the quality and the stability of the life. So, very stressful shit when you're doing it on. Eventually you get used to it and you get good at it. even when it's life and death, 2-3 years.
And we can't claim something that we're not
we
a part
can't,
of.
we're not saying that like other systems don't work. It's just that it wasn't a. Remember, we weren't doing FMA because we had a love for traditional Filipino martial art. We're doing it because we had to.
Because we had to.
Right. Now, if we had guns, this system would be a gun system. It would be a boxing system. Like, yeah, because guys are getting stabbed all the time when we're fighting with their hands.
Yeah.
We've seen guys. We had friends who died when we were young on the street fighting, like stabbed and shot. They were trying to run with their hands and they got poked up or they got popped. So that is the influence. This is why the system is so heavily weapon oriented. I remember a time me and my brothers, these guys, because we were known in the neighborhood for being like the Bruce Lees on the block, and these guys would come around and me and my brother would fight them every Saturday, fist fight. And it's fist fighting, man. It's fun. It's all nice. It's fun. The worst thing that happens, you get knocked out, people make fun of you, your ego hurts, you get choked out. But back then, there were yoking people, right? They were doing all the choke outs. And the guy we're fighting, we would fight all the time. His older brother got into a fight, and he was like 15 at the time. Me and my younger, we were fighting. We were like 10.
Hey, it was his
12.
older brother was one of the tough guys.
He's a tough guy on the block.
He's a known tough guy.
Yeah, known for
Good
his
fighter.
hands. Good fighter. And he got into a fight with a guy, wrestling match. The guy drew out 22. Back then we called deuces, right? Because that was the street term. And he got popped in the femoral and he died. And it was the first time I heard somebody who got shot in the leg that complained about his heart.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that when you bled out, you died of cardiac arrest. Because I was 12 years old. But we were doing a lot of empty hand stuff then. And after that, man, we heard about people dying on the street, stabs and guns, and we went back to that weapon. I mean, stabs and guns, and we went back to that weapon. I mean, my brother told me stories about them trying to stop, because a lot of the Filipinos in the area would be robbed, and they would go help them out, and guns would come out right away. You hear it was always saying we start with a fist fight and then pop, pop, pop. Guys take out knives, because the knives we didn't care about. We would fight guys with knives without knives. But that's the game, like that's how it was, so even now we have the saying, it's not real combat unless you're wearing shoes and a belt. Legit, yeah. If you're not training with your shoes or you're not training with a real belt, it's not real fighting. It's not. Like to us, that's legit, like